So I know that Mark was raised in Illinois, went to college there at
University of Illinois.
University of Illinois, and then somehow arrived here. He and his wife Elaine started Fellowships of the Spirit. Is it 39 years? Would that be right? I was thinking about that.
Well, 38 years, because it was 1980, hang on, 88, yeah.
So
it's 38 years.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. And I even remember this, Joe and Pat Bianco.
Bianco, that's right.
I'm really proud of myself that I remembered that, I'll tell you. Mark spent his life in service. He was the local, what's the term? Executive.
County executive.
County executive for Chautauqua County. And eventually he retired from being the administrator for the Parks and Recreation in Western New York. It's probably not the official title, but it's close enough. So I'm always pleased when Mark's here to speak. Just like Stacy this morning, he always gives me something to think about. But before I turn the mic over to him, I found this quote by Jan Williams, and I'm going to start with it, and then Mark can take over. It's called Thresholds. Whether we arrive at these between places by design or by the choices that others have made for us, that threshold can be a place of wonder. It can also be chaotic, discombobulating, and even terrifying. Yet a threshold, chosen or otherwise, is a place of wild possibility. So with that, I give you Reverend Mark Thomas.
Thank you very much. Let me just double check this microphone. Yeah, we're good. All right. So John O'Donohue and Jan Williams, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good lead-in for me tonight on the concept of thresholds. Tonight, I'm going to take an angle on this concept of thresholds. I've entitled what I'm doing tonight, Recovering and Appreciating the Threshold Moments of Life in this time of constant transitions we're living through. So the reading I have for tonight is also O'Donohue, and it picks up on where Williams and the prior O'Donohue reading that Christy did. Today, many people describe themselves as being in transition. In a culture governed by speed, this is to be expected, for the exterior rate of change is relentless. By the way, this was written in 2007. Not changed much in 20 years, in 19 years. This transition can refer to relationships, work, location, or more significantly to the inner life and way of viewing the world. Yet the word transition seems to be pale, functional, almost inadequate and impersonal, and does not have the same intensity or psychic weight as perhaps the word threshold evokes. So I want to pick up on that theme a little bit this evening and go from there. Those of you that know, I love words, and so of course had to look up some of the etymology and where's this word threshold come from? Was the use, how's it been used? And it's been used, what I found is it's all over the block. In old times, they would thresh grain, and the wheat and the chaff would be separated, or the oats and the chaff, whatever, the grain, and the grain would be disposed of in the stalk that provided the grain its life is then used for composting, if you will, or manure, or whatever, feeding animals, etc. It was always used for something else, but it certainly wasn't used to make bread or other oat kinds of things, feed kinds of things for human. So, but it gave life to that grain that then ended up feeding us or livestock, etc. So a part of the threshing was to separate out that which was needed but is no longer needed, which is kind of an interesting thing when we look at the concept of a threshold, stepping forward or out from somewhere. The other use historically with threshold is in days of old as well. They put, and what we still use thresholds to help close the opening of doors. So doors close to a threshold, right? And in the old days, before they had concrete or stone floors, they had dirt floors. And one of the things that the straw was used for that was no longer needed, as I just spoke of it, they would use it on the floors, and the threshold held the thresh in the building so that when people came and went, the threshold kept the straw in place on the inside instead of having it all end up going outside. So it served the purpose of keeping that which was no longer in its life stage, therefore to help keep life going on the inside in a higher quality of life, let's put it that way, so that they weren't walking on dirt. They were able to have straw on the floor. So there's a couple of definitions that I found. There are others, not worth our time and energy this evening, because those two actually do tie into where I want to go with this talk tonight. So I also want to draw the distinction between a threshold, which is at the base of a door, and a window sill, which is the base of a window. Now, we do two different things. With a door, we do one set of things. With a window, we do others. Windows, we observe through. We don't take action through a window. We take action when we step in and out over a threshold. And I like to draw that distinction because a lot of folks want to be very observational about life. And it's a trend that as things get more electronic in our lives, there's an awful lot more observationals going on. And at the same time, we are losing the concept of thresholds in life. And I'll elaborate on that. You see, in prior eras of life, we had these thresholds called rites of passage. Now what we have is rites of passage that's left is a driver's license, rite of passage. And we've seen so many of the rites of passage go away. As people have moved away from the organized religion, the rites of passage, which were part of the regular evolution in life, have been drifting out of people's lives as well. In the Christian traditions, you had First Communions, you had the confirmation classes, and the confirmation where people at teenage made a decision whether they wanted to become members of a church or not. And then you saw in the Jewish tradition, you had bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. So those kinds of things. And as people have moved away from organized religion, then those rites of passage are no longer there. So kids are growing in through adolescence, and there's no celebration of their coming into womanhood or manhood. That was just a very important part of their growth and evolution. Now it's a driver's license. Oh, you can drive now. You can drive a car. And the sad thing about that is those were family traditions. Those it wasn't just about your growth as an individual. It was about the family and the community coming around that growth and celebrating that moment of womanhood, manhood, etc., as just an example of a key threshold. There are many others too that have been so much a part of our world and our culture, and yet some of them have been relegated to institutional education. One of the things I saw this week was it saddened me when I saw a pre-K graduation and they had caps and gowns. So it's a dilution of something that would be a normal completing an entire high school diploma, a degree, or a collegiate one or advanced degrees. And so now we're laying that on young children who have no concept of what it is. and no concept of that as a rite of passage whatsoever. It's just a decoration for parents to get excited about. But it's like, yeah, it's important. Those are milestones. But we've just depleted the impact of those larger graduations that come as a rite of passage when someone's stepping into adulthood from their childhood. So you cross a threshold, and as you read earlier in the passage, we step over a threshold in life, and we have many of them, and there's so many, where we are not the same person we were before we stepped over the threshold. Once we step over the threshold, we can look back or step back in, but we're not the same person. We've crossed over into a different place inside ourselves and as we interact in community. I was very, very excited that Stacy and Michelle put together the Pride Day activities, and to be there today and listen to the accounts on both the keynote speakers as well as the panel conversations that were had today about the various thresholds in life that these folks from the LGBTQ plus, I'll call it plus and leave it at and they got into that discussion today too. But thresholds of coming out was a big deal. Gender identity being embraced, another threshold. Vulnerability being challenged, and refusing victimhood as they grow as they cross thresholds and refusing to go into a space of victimhood. And when you look back through history in the various spiritual movements, I'd like to draw a couple of to your attention. One, so much about Christianity is focused on the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus, but I think for me, my understanding of where the real shift happened was the night of his arrest at the Garden of Gethsemane, where he went into prayer and he said, if this cup can pass me, please, I'd rather go a different direction. And through the idiom that's used in the text is he was sweating blood, which is an Aramaic idiom for great distress, great turmoil. And he was in that turmoil to the point where he prayed and got to the point of peace where I'd like this cup to pass, but if it's your will, then I will move forward. So he crossed the threshold that evening. That was the threshold he had to cross. The rest of it just took its course. Mother Teresa, when she was Sister Teresa, before she started her own order, was a nun in a convent in Albania. And she was drawn to go into the streets of Calcutta to work with the destitute and the dying who were in the gutters in the city streets and in horrible condition, and felt that she needed to create a space for them to die with dignity and to be loved even though they were in such miserable condition. And she had to go up through the orders and through the Pope himself to get approval to start her order, which then she became Mother Teresa, as we all know her, of Calcutta. And the impacts that she had, she crossed a threshold that was a religious life, but it was a very difficult life she chose, but it was one of service which was a huge risk to her and to the people that joined with her in that order. St. Francis, another one who lived a life of luxury and privilege, decided, I got to cross this threshold because I can't live this life, and lived a life on the streets, basically, and living a life of poverty. And then the last one I want to reference is more modern, is Rosa Parks, who decided one day that she'd had enough and she wasn't going to go to the back of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and decided, you know what, you can arrest me. And she said, you may do that. when the bus driver said he was going to have her hauled off the bus and arrested, she said, "You may do that." Gave him permission in that moment. A crossing of a threshold. The rest is history, because the major efforts of the civil rights movement took on a whole new dimension in the 1950s as a result of that moment where she'd said, "I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore." Crossed the threshold. Shaped a world. You know, in each of those examples and many, many others, the people who have had mega impact on the world have at some point crossed thresholds. Some of them at the time may have seemed very difficult. Some may have seemed, oh, well, no big deal. And then that threshold led to steps and further thresholds and so forth until their impact on the world has, as we have seen, shaped life and events. You know, Elaine, one of the threshold moments for her was when she left the comfort of John Carlson Memorial Spiritual Church in Buffalo. She was the associate pastor under Reverend Wendling. They had a very good relationship, and yet she wanted more. She wanted to be able to do more teaching and in a different way. She wanted to leave her job as an educator in the public school system. At the same time, she left being the associate pastor at John Carlson Church. So talk about a threshold crossing. She put it all out there on the line, and it was a huge step, a huge threshold to cross. And she did. And we're here tonight at Fellowships, and all the work that she was able to accomplish through all the years of her ministry work are a result of her stepping over that important threshold at a time that it was not easy. It was a very difficult choice. And until the day another threshold, and she stayed with that ministry until the day she stepped into another threshold, which was called hospice, which was the moment where she said, "I'm not fighting anymore. I've got to let go of life as the body was held, and as worn out as she was, there was nothing more to fight with." And contrary to a spiritualist axiom that I have had issues with for a long time, but in Elaine's death, it really came home to me, was the spiritualists oftentimes will say, there is no death, there are no dead. And that's a denial of a threshold. That's an important threshold that we all go through. It's the end of a life, and you make a decision, consciously or otherwise, to step from this body, this framework, this, as John O'Donohue would say, this clay, into a different level of existence. Yes, existence changes, but there is a moment of death where what you've been carrying around called a body, the clothes we put with our spirit, is left behind. And when that left behind happens, the rest of us get to deal with the grief and the loss, the sorrow that goes with that. So thresholds are critical. They do matter. And we do our best when we don't deny their existence, but when we embrace the thresholds that are in front of us and walk through. And like we heard this afternoon from Dr. Neil Zubkowski, when he was let go by the hospital here locally because he had HIV back in the 1980s, he said he refused to be a victim. He refused he stepped over the threshold, and new opportunities emerged. Right away, he was picked up as a physician in Buffalo for working with people who had HIV and AIDS, who needed a physician, needed a doctor's presence. And so his doctoral work, his medical work, but also his ministry as well, shifted at that moment. So we never know what's on the other side of a threshold, and yet we're called to embrace. And when we step across thresholds, we don't know what we're stepping into. And at times, it can take us into a new dimension of life. But more importantly, what will it contribute to everybody else? So I have an invitation this evening, as I usually do. I conclude talks, and that is what thresholds have you crossed? Do a little inventory. What are the thresholds in your life you've stepped over and stepped through. And how have they changed your life? And I invite everyone to spend some moments in introspection. Contemplation, that's that word. Yeah, there's that word, contemplation. To see how the thresholds you crossed at certain points in your life have had an impact, and how is that continuing to have an impact in your life as well. And pause for a few moments in this world of great transitions to appreciate and celebrate the thresholds you've crossed already and what impact they've had in your life, but also in the lives of others. The second one is slow down and evaluate the transitions of current modern life that are going on in and around you on a daily basis. What about those transitions are serving you, and what about those transitions are a waste of time? And maybe an avoidance of a new threshold. Who can say? You can. But it requires, again, that introspection, or there's that word again, contemplation. And thirdly, what thresholds are right in front of you right now, and are you ready to embrace them? Because it's in the embracing and the stepping through that not only do you do something different, but you are never the same again. And I invite you to embrace the possibility that your life can be so much more than it is, and the service that you can bring to others is so much a greater possibility when you step through the threshold that's in front of you. Have a lovely evening, and God bless you, and thank you for being here this evening.